Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
Hey, Dad, thanks for joining us on this week's episode. You may not know this, but you're coming in at the end of a series. So if you're the kind of guy who likes to start in the last chapter of the book and read it backward, feel free to listen to today's episode. But who wants to do that? Instead, go back 7 or 8 episodes, start with the Survival Gear series. We're on part 7 of a framework we have at Manhood Journey called Survival Gear, 7 essential tools every dad needs for his journey. And today we're going to talk about the 7th tool, which is how to make disciples. So here's the question you want to be wrestling with as we dive into today's episode. Are you pouring into other people? Have you taken what you've learned on your life's journey and helped others along their own journey? If not, today could be the day when you start doing that. We're going to talk about how to do that. We're going to talk about why to do that. We're going to talk about some barriers to doing that. Before we do that, I want to remind you, today's show is brought to you by the wonderful people at Range Leather. Range Leather is in Laramie, Wyoming, but they ship all over. I was out there a couple months ago, got to see the operation firsthand. Amazing place. Thanks to Kyle and his team for sponsoring the show. You can get 15% off your next order at rangeleather.com if you use the code MJ15. The M stands for manhood. The J stands for journey. 15, that's MJ15 for 15% off your next order. Range Leather has amazing products. They have purses. They have earrings. They have this snappy Apple Watch band like the one I wear. They have a tremendous amount of cool products. Go check them out today at rangeleather.com. Lawson, are you excited that we're wrapping up this series on survival gear?
I am excited this is over. Yeah. I'm excited we're wrapping this up.
No, you're not the first guy to be excited to be wrapping something up with Ken Evans.
Gosh, can we please wrap this up? Can I please get off this phone with you? No, man, it's so the last one here, number 7, make disciples. In the book, in the handbook, it's signified by a rope, like a rappelling rope. And I like that for a couple of reasons. It is, when you're tethered in with someone on the side of a rock face, you are very much dependent on one another. And I think making disciples is a lot like that. It's to me, especially when I'm thinking about like as dads, our kids. I honestly didn't approach parenting early on like, okay, I'm going to let me be very strategic and purposeful because I know that what I am doing is all about making a disciple. I didn't know enough. I didn't think that. I learned that later. And still, even now, my daughters and I are roped together. We are in this thing together. And sometimes I go up ahead and they're, on the rock face wall, they're beneath me and following along. And then other times they pass and I tether in with them and belay them, and so they're going out maybe on a bit of a solo journey kind of thing, and I'm there holding my end of the rope to keep them with me. Yeah. And so it made me think a disciple. I ought to automatically just picture, the 12 apostles, right? And what a biblical disciple in my brain looks like. And that feels like an impossible task, like as a dad to create something like that. Jesus did that, but it is applicable to us dads on purpose here, because what a disciple means to me is, let's expound on this. It's a learner. It's a follower in its simplest form. It's a person who is a learner or follower. And I went on to do a little looking It also, listen to this, a disciple strongly believes in the ideas or teaching of a leader
Mm.
and works to spread or share those ideas. So, do my daughters, would if interviewed anonymously, would they say, "Yeah, I'm a follower from my dad"?
Well, here's
I'm
the thing. Actually, they would not, because I did interview them. I called them up and I said,
Right.
"Hey, no, I'm just kidding. I bet they would. No, I think they would."
I think what I hope they would say is, I saw my dad following,
Yeah.
and so I know what that looks like, and he set an example, and he carved part of a path for me. I don't want them to follow me. I want them to follow Jesus. I want them to follow their learning of their faith and listening to God in their lives. And so if they are doing that, then I can go, great, 2 thumbs up.
Right.
I have, air quote, made disciples. That's kind of where I've
Yeah.
landed with this thought.
Well, and what's interesting is to some degree, when guys ask me, how can I be discipling my family? My knee jerk reaction now after having done, fatherhood ministry for about 15 years and sat across from hundreds of dads.
Yeah, you better have this right.
Well, it is. My answer is this: you already are.
Yeah.
And sometimes they look back at me and go, "Well, no, I'm not. I'm not leading a devotional. I'm not taking them to church. I'm not praying with them." And I'm like, "Well, you are discipling them." And I think sometimes it takes me 2 or 3 kind of repetitions to have it sink in until we realize I am discipling my kids one way or the other. So like it could, because at the end of the day, I'm headed somewhere, right? And I am either explicitly or implicitly encouraging someone to follow me. Because why would I go where I think it's stupid to go? So if I'm going there, if I'm a UK fan or I'm an Alabama fan, or I'm obsessed with money, or I am obsessed with golf, or whatever like thing that is like the buoy off in the distance that I'm walking toward, whether that's mechanical, financial, relational, spiritual, by default, I'm suggesting you should probably follow me. And so what dad's got to realize is, do you want to be a discipler? You want to be discipling? Congratulations. The end. You already are. Now the question becomes, when you realize that to some degree you're being followed, where are you taking people? That becomes the better question. So for example, let me trot out a few scriptures. And I sometimes don't like to do this because if you get a bunch of disconnected scriptures, you can get some kind of wacky interpretations, but
yeah,
here's a few, right? 2 Corinthians 1:11. Sorry, I would correct myself already. 1 Corinthians 11:1. There's so many ones in there.
A lot of ones in there.
1 Corinthians 11:1 says, "Be imitators of me as I am of Christ." So there's Paul inserting himself in this kind of like Pied Piper sort of role where he's going, "Hey, I'm headed toward Christ. I'm headed that direction. Be an imitator of me. Be an imitator of me." I remember when we first started Manhood Journey 14 years ago, I remember asking a specific guy if he wanted to be part of this kind of ministry startup, and we were going to do fatherhood kinds of things. His answer was really interesting. And he goes, "Oh, no, I don't want to be part of that." And I'm like, "Why not?" And he goes, "Oh, I don't have enough skill and experience as a dad yet to be part of that."
Right.
And what I thought was really interesting was he fundamentally misunderstood what we were trying to build. because here's the deal. I'm not trying to build a Kent Evans fatherhood cult. That is not my objective. I'm not saying, "Hey man, since I've learned everything about fatherhood, just sit at my feet and let me teach you what I think, and then you can follow me." Instead, I'm following God's word best I can, flawed, imperfect. I'm sure I'm not doing it exactly right. And I'm following the person of Jesus Christ. So like Paul, I'm trying to say, follow me as I follow Christ, which gives you permission to call me out when I'm not. So I'm not the source. And that's what was funny is that guy fundamentally misunderstood what we were trying to do. We weren't trying to create the fatherhood guidelines. We were just trying to point people to them because it's all in God's word and it's all in the character and the person of Jesus Christ. Secondly, 2 Timothy 2:2. 2 Timothy 2:2. And what you have heard from me, Paul's telling Timothy, in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. So here we are again with Paul kind of setting himself up as the example to follow. But what he's admitting is what you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses. Well, which of Paul's thoughts were his own original idea? None. He would even say, I consider all of the things I've gained as rubbish, as loss compared to following Christ. And here was a guy who was a Roman citizen, a Pharisee. Like Paul was extremely well educated. He could have said, hey man, just do what I said. I remember years ago, I may have told this story before, Lawson. I was in London and I was having lunch with a guy named Rob, and I asked him for some advice. And he was in his mid-60s at the time and had been doing the thing I asked him for advice about for 25 years. If anybody could speak from experience, it would be him. And so I said, hey, Rob, this is what I'm trying to do. Can you help me? What do you think? And he, in the middle of a restaurant in London, England, sat his spoon down, looked at me, and then he looked up at the sky. And he didn't even answer me. He just goes, God, Kent wants some advice, and I really don't want to give him any advice that's just for me. Would you tell me what you want me to tell him? Thank you. And then he looked me back in the eye and started talking. Yeah. And I just remember thinking that'd be kind of like modern day, going to like Steph Curry and asking him for basketball advice. And he just goes, I really don't want to give him my advice. What does God want me to tell you about basketball? Like he's an all pro Hall of Fame skill level guy who's still acknowledged.
Right.
I'm not the source. God's the source. Let me just see if I can pass on to you what he passed on to me. And that's the principle that dads have to embrace on today's podcast. Number one, you're already discipling. Number two, where are you going? Where are you taking?
Right. And it's not about creating little mini me's or saying, just mimic what I do. It's less about what I do. I think in our minds, I would submit it's less about how we behave, what acts we are involved in or not. It's a state. It's a sense of us following and so mindset, therefore follow me. What'd you say?
It's a mindset. And frankly, at my size, I'm 5'3", maybe 5'3.5". If I just kept creating mini me's and that was the model, my great grandkids, goodness, I mean, they're going to be like super tiny, super tiny.
But have you ever seen on the internet the meme going around that shows Tiger Woods and his son? What's his son's name? Charlie.
I don't know. Yeah.
And the mannerisms, like they do them side by side, and the way Tiger, spins his club, the way he stands while he's waiting, the thing he does when the putt sinks and he points up, Charlie wasn't looking at his dad and doing it in the moment. He was out on his own. Yeah. Having very, they look like a little mirror image of Tiger. And that is something that we've got to realize, is that our kids are watching more than we realize sometimes. And if they hear from us, don't come to, I am not, like you said, I'm not the source. Let's do this together. Follow me as I follow him.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody said to me the other day, hey, you're just like your son. Somebody said who knew me and one of my boys. And I just said, no, he's like me. Like I was here first. Okay. Right. So let's just remember that. I don't even know that they meant it as a compliment. I think they were actually insulting both of us at the same time. What I find interesting about this topic, Lawson, is one of the barriers that, and I've partially addressed it already. I want to screw it down all the way. One of the barriers to making disciples is some guys are waiting until they are perfect before they become intentional about making disciples. And we all know, and when you say that out loud, sometimes the things that help us a lot are the things that are in our mind, but we just got to say them out loud. That's stupid, right? I mean, what that basically means is you will go your whole life and disciple nobody. because I can tell you when you're going to be perfect, right? After you die is when you're going to become perfect. So if that's what you're waiting on, that's a fool's errand. Let's stop waiting on being perfect. So recognize you're already discipling, aim them toward Christ. Don't wait till you're perfect. Jesus said, whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. So he's reminding us, you got to bear your own cross. Like you, as a dad, your job obviously was to raise 2 daughters because that's what God gave you. That's the field he gave you. That's your Ephesians 2:10 good work. For me, it was boys. It's 5 sons. And so that's not that my boys are my cross to bear, although there are those days, right? But that is the unique assignment that's been given to me in the area of discipleship. And not only that, I mean, there's other guys that I'm in the process of discipling and pouring into, and that they are discipling me. So not just my own kids, but it's a unique call. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. There are things I need to do just like Jesus did them. Got to love people, got to speak life, got to be honest, got to be pure. There are things I want to do that are just like Jesus did it or just like Paul did it. But then there's also a unique place where I'm supposed to be working that Lawson Brown can't work geographically, relationally. I've got to go influence certain people that you don't have the opportunity to influence and vice versa. There's a ton of people you're running into that I'll never meet. And that's your mission field. And my field is my mission field. So I hope dads are on board with you and I, and they're embracing these concepts of discipleship because it's so, so important.
Yeah. The Survival Gear ebook, I think it leads up to this. Chapter 7 is the 7th for a reason. They all work together. You can't, I think they do. I think they all go together to sort of culminate. I know the Make Disciples is like the final tool that we put into our backpack, but they kind of go together to lead to this point. Does that make sense to you? Like the Make Disciples, the other 6 are components that all work together to get us here to this point. But like you said, we're never going to get to the place where we go, okay, now I am now the perfect dad. And so now I'm ready to mentor. Now I'm ready to disciple. It's a journey. I picture like the dad with their kid goes, hey, we're going to go learn this together. Come with me. Follow me through this. Yeah. Sometimes I'm going to be holding your hand tight. Sometimes I'm going to actually pick you up and carry you. And then other times you're going to be walking and you're going to discover your footsteps on your own. But we are both together in this, following him.
Yeah, that's right.
And so let's go do this together. Now, some of the things that takes is some credibility, a relationship built on, candor and transparency and trust. Trust is a big one, because without some of those elements of your relationship with your kids, you can not be either. I'm not trying to say like you're not worthy of being followed or worthy of being the dad responsible to make disciples, but it kind of may fall flat if what they hear you say versus what you do, and you're never going to get that right. There are so many times in my life that I am thankful that neither of my kids saw me do something that I did, or come across the way I did, or say something the way I said it. And so, you know what I'm saying? Like, but doing this together built on a relationship of trust and transparency is part of it.
Yeah. I heard an NBA player one time who's in the Hall of Fame say, hey, after I shoot the ball, only one of 2 things can happen. It either goes in which case I know what my next job is, or it doesn't go in which case I know what my next job is. And so what was fascinating about that is he didn't chuck the ball up and go, man, I sure hope it goes in. And then when it didn't, which frankly, even if you're going to the Hall of Fame, most of the time the ball isn't going to go in unless you're a center and you just only shoot from the paint, right? You're going to have a 40-50% percentage completion. So most of the time you're going to have to be either getting back on defense or blocking out for a rebound or so knowing what to do after a failure or what to do after a mistake is part of the discipleship process. What I find so fascinating is people think teaching or discipleship or coaching is about being flawless. And then as soon as I can do it flawlessly, I can teach you how to do it. I think that's the enemy. That's the enemy trying to get you mathematically to never disciple anybody, because he knows you're going to find yourself in that spot of having, quote unquote, missed the shot quite often. And so if you watch really good athletes, just use them as an example, because it's an obvious, win-loss and either goes in or it doesn't kind of idea. What do the Hall of Fame athletes do after something doesn't go their way, and the game is still going on? They do their next job, right?
Yeah.
If you, and one of the more fascinating places to see this is last year I saw, I can't remember the exact quarterback, but it was an NFL quarterback who threw an interception. If I remember right, he threw an interception and then tackled the guy who caught the intercepted ball and forced a fumble and recovered it, like himself. And then you just think, okay, so after he threw the interception, he didn't hang his head and go, oh, darn, I guess I'll walk off the field now. He's like, nope, there's a pick. I'm going to go get that guy. And then he went and got that guy and got the ball back. Like, fascinating play, series of plays. And for dads, I hope what you're hearing, Dad, is you're going to blow it. You're going to make mistakes. And how you process those mistakes will be as much a part of your discipleship process as how you process the things you do right.
Yeah. Ooh, that is good, man. Yeah, I love that. And that takes some of the pressure off, because being a father is hard. And there's a lot of, there are plenty of times where anxiety creeps in, and am I doing this thing right? Or did I handle that situation with my kid right? I hope more often than not, when my kids look back, they remember the high points and somehow forget, like the memories of where it didn't go right are they dissolve into, that you don't remember them. But the other thing that I think I love being symbolized by the rope is there are times when I want to be tied in with other dudes, other dads.
Yeah.
And because, it can be scary. And I don't like the thought of me alone in the woods with my family, discipling my children. I want to have partners. And so many times God has worked through other men in my life to help me. And in some cases, disciple my own children. They've done that. Pete has done that. Michael has done that.
Yeah.
You've done that, and so knowing that you're not alone is a good reminder. And I think it's biblical, it's modeled many times. Jesus could have come onto this earth and done what he did solo.
Yeah.
He didn't. He chose to surround himself.
Yeah.
And in doing and in the doing of that compounded his efforts. And I think as dads, we can also model that in our own lives.
One of the things that you can almost not replace in the discipleship process is time spent with other people. So I think what you're going to find is, as someone once said, you can impress people from a distance, but you can only impact them from up close. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. And if you look at the book of Acts and look at how the early church, how these early apostles, early disciples went about their life. Acts 2:42 says they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. So there's this notion you even see in other spots where it talks about sacrificial giving or communal living or giving up some of their own possessions and turning some of that over to the church. There were things that they did in order to have a commonality and a community and a bond with other people. And that's what I think you were hinting at, Lawson. When we talk about discipleship, I tend to think of it as in like concentric circles. We're in the middle. It's me and my wife, and we're discipling to some degree each other. I don't want to get into a big debate over headship, but I'm just saying there's a lot I learned from my wife, April. She's brilliant, Holy Spirit sensitive, deep in prayer, really wise. There's a lot I learned from her, and vice versa. She and I trade a lot of notes. We'll read a book together and then kind of not debate, but like say, hey, what part of that book did you agree with? Did you find things in that book that you thought were a little crazy? So we do that together. Then my kids, next ring out. And now that I'm starting to acquire daughters-in-law, or at least one so far, I feel like that's part of that next ring out for me. My children, their spouses, and it looks different because they're all adults by the time you acquire them. Then there's friends, business associates, colleagues, people I work with alongside my board of directors. That's very bi-directional at Manhood Journey. They're discipling me, I'm discipling them. There's that. And then there's a wider audience of just, I hope somebody gets value out of this podcast. I don't really think the guy listening, as I'm not discipling Sal in Louisiana or Andrew up in Minneapolis, in the, oh man, where's he live? Minnesota, or Tim out in California, or Scott in South Carolina. I'm not discipling those guys, but I hope they get some value out of this podcast. Go use this podcast to disciple people. Use it as an excuse to have conversations. One of the questions, I want to be very practical. If you look at your concentric circles and you have your wife, your spouse, you have your kids, you maybe have some brothers or sisters or family members or extended family or colleagues. If you've got room in your discipleship sort of matrix for other dads. So if this is you, if you're like running with other dads, they're on your sports team, they're on your deacon committee, they teach Bible study with you. You see these guys at work. Let me give you a really fun, but also very probing, but not seemingly threatening question you can ask another dad today. When you're with another dad, just say to this guy, hey man, I'm curious. What is your greatest challenge right now as a dad? And what's interesting about that question is it's singular. You're not asking them for a top 10 list. You're not asking them for all. You're not asking them for even necessarily something that's too personal, because, they could say, oh, my kid's crazy. And that's a little bit removed. What it will cause is it will cause a discipleship conversation to happen if you let it. Because he's going to share something. When we ask that question, both in surveys, but also face-to-face, I get a whole scad of answers, but they tend to follow some common themes. Amount of time, could be finances, could be relational conflict, could be disobedience of children, could be adult kids not knowing how to react once they're out of the home. It's a lot of times we'll ask a dad, what's your single greatest challenge as a father? And his answer starts with, well, my marriage is in a tough spot right now. Which is interesting, isn't it? Because I didn't say what's your single greatest challenge in your marriage or what's your single greatest challenge in life, but they see marital conflict as an impediment to, being able to be an engaged dad. So just as a very small practical thing, I dare you, dad, after this podcast, you're thinking, how can I put this podcast into action? Go ask another dad, what is your greatest challenge right now as a father? And I'll bet you it deepens and spurs a conversation that you're going to be glad you had.
What's going on, dads? Check this out. Hey, in the world of fatherhood, balancing style and functionality is key, right? Range Leather gets it. Offering products like the sleek Elbert wallet and the American flag hat. It's perfect for dads on the move. Made from the finest Horween leather, Range's products don't just look good. They are built to accompany you through every dad duty with elegance and resilience. Snag your next dad essential at rangeleather.com and save 15% when you use code MJ15 at checkout. Head to rangeleather.com to get your swag. That's RANGE leather.com. Yeah, my brother-in-law, Bo, and I have, I've known him for 25 years or more. And I can't tell you the number of times that we've had heart-to-hearts on our lives, our marriages, our children, and Bo, obviously he knows my daughters really well. And I love his daughter, Emily. It helps that we know one another really well. And how many times have we prayed together? How many times have I shared what's going on in their lives? And, it's having that depth of relationship, and he's got a field of view of my family that's very unique, and he's very bought in to my faith, the faith of my family, the discipleship that we're doing. Now he has a grandson, and you can see, like we've done life together. And I think what you're saying is right on the money. Go talk to a dad. It's got to get started. If we've heard from guys, Kent, where what they say is, I hear that, but I don't know where to start. I don't know how to do that. I don't have a lot of friends in my life that I would want to bring in that close, or maybe, they're not that kind of personality that it comes natural to. So, like you said, very practical way is just be open. God can put people in your life and stir up, a depth of relationship that's going to help you, like Bo has with me for, 25, 30 years. But doing it alone on purpose can sometimes be being done without really even realizing it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like we've talked before about, we are sometimes inherently or not inherently, but like we want to be capable solo drivers. And that is sometimes stemming from ego, and not this release of control that God's in control. You trust him completely. Take your hands fully off the wheel and trust. That comes with time. That comes with giving it a try and seeing God will be faithful. And when you see that in action, it kind of like helps you take the next step, and continue that faith relationship. Same way with guys in our lives that you can grow together with.
Absolutely. Well, and what's beautiful is I remember being at lunch with a friend of mine about a year and a half ago. His name's Greg. And I asked him about how he related to his adult children. He's about 8 or 10 years older than me. And his kids are all kind of also, commensurately older than mine. And he's got all adult children. And I just said, hey man, what did you do differently as your kids hit, into their adult years? And he recommended a book to me. I read the book. I got a lot better understanding of some ways I could be an effective parent of an adult child by reading that book. And it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't asked him for some input, for some advice, right? Just say, hey man, what have you done?
You put yourself out there. You were kind of vulnerable and like, help me.
Yeah. And frankly, like every now and then it's like today, if I go skiing, for me, a blue is really scary. I'm a green guy. I'm not a great skier yet. And so I would do greens most of the day and maybe work myself up to a blue toward the end. Other guys, they jump out and they're great skilled skiers. They start on double blacks and they're fine all the way down. If you find the question, hey, to another dad, hey, how did you handle this with your kid? If that sounds like a double black diamond to you, you need to catch up. Like that is not being vulnerable. That is not being like out there, like, wow, I'm on this limb of exposure. If you don't know how to ask another dad how he's processed his life, I would encourage you to figure that out, because I've gotten so much value from other dads who are 1 or 2 steps ahead of me in the fatherhood journey. And I recognize I've got a lot of skill as a dad. I've tackled a lot of these, problems as a dad, but I also know I'm not perfect and I can learn from everybody. One thing that I would love to say, Lawson, before we wrap up today's show is what is perhaps, it'll tie me back to the things we said at the top, but I just want to double click on one concept. And here's the concept. You are most likely to reproduce what you are, not what you say. So often our children become mirrors that reflect back to us some of our own priorities. And until you can say that out loud and kind of admit that and be honest about that, I think you're going to miss some opportunities and stunt your own spiritual growth. So for example, if your kids leave church and on the way home, they gripe about the sermon, they gripe about the music, they gripe about the carpet, they gripe about this, they probably learned that from you. Or if your children come home from an event and all they can do is talk bad about who they saw at the event and who was selfish and who was this and that. They probably heard you say those same things about your colleagues at work over dinner when you came home and griped about work. Finally, just one more example, right? That I know this may sting a little, but so does good medicine, right? If your kids spend all day scrolling on social media or inhaling news, and at the end of the day, all they want to do is yell about whoever's on the other side of the issue, political aisle, whatever, it's probably because they saw that pattern somewhere. Now, maybe it wasn't you, but you know what? Probably was. And so I have screamed at my children this phrase. We don't scream at people when we're angry. Like, I'm not kidding. That's not a made up, like, oh, that's literally happened. And I'm like, I'm a moron. What is going on that I would actually have the capacity to scream a phrase about not screaming when we're angry? So for me, it's the language of liberation, right? It's the language. It's like watching game film after a game, and you realize, oh, shoot, that's how I made that mistake. Really good athletes love to watch game film. Really insecure, miniaturized spiritual people will never do the autopsy, will never do the postmortem, will never do the review. And I want to encourage a dad. If your kids seem out of control, are you out of control? If your kids seem to lie a lot, do you lie a lot? Are you not tell the whole truth? Are your kids wasteful with money? And so are you. Do your kids sound entitled and like the world ought to revolve around them? And if you play that back, it's like, I do that a lot. That the world. Let's recognize a lot of what we're doing as a dad is caught, not taught.
Yeah. I hoped you were going to say that.
Yeah. If we're going to make disciples, we just got to be honest. Cause then here's what's really cool. You can go back to your kids at one point and go, hey, you know what? I've noticed a pattern around here. And the pattern is we leave church and we always have something negative to say. And you know who started that pattern? Me. I started that pattern. And you know what I want to do? I want to change that pattern. So this Sunday, y'all help me change that pattern.
Right on. That's it. That's as simple as that.
Simple as that. And what's crazy is even that is discipling. 100%. I recognized the problem. I saw the problem. I told people about the problem. Yeah. I asked for forgiveness. I asked for accountability. That whole process will make your children robust, sturdy, strong young men and women. We've got to be able to model that, Lawson.
Yeah, right on. Dads, remember that you are being watched. Back to that Charlie Woods, Tiger Woods thing. It shows Tiger's reaction when he sees how identical his son's behaviors on the golf course are going. And he's just like, that should dawn on us in that way. He sees it and goes, wow, he is like spitting image of me. Your kids are watching. And back to let's end where we started, and you can wrap us up on this thought. Disciple is a learner, a follower who strongly believes in the ideas or teachings of a leader and works to spread or share those ideas. So are you seeing your children reflecting where they're following in their lives? How that reflects on us as dads is simply, who are we following? What direction are we taking? Where is our true north pointing? Where is God's word leading us? Sometimes I've looked back and my kids aren't there. Guess what? Because they are following, not me. I'm the one off track. So I got to get back, like you were just saying, like, hey, here's a pattern. I recognize a pattern. I'm going to be part of the solution now. We're going to fix this and change it. So it's okay. Recover, Dad. Get back on. Follow your true north and share, I think, openly with your kids what we're learning along the way on this journey, because nobody's got this figured out, and we rely on each other. Hopefully what you and me, sit around and talk about on this podcast help somebody as well, and I always pray, like, let's let not this be of us.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's speak what God has got on our hearts in a way that conveys somehow to some dad out there that it clicks in. I got a text from somebody in my life that just made my whole week. He said he had a long drive, kind of a road trip for work, and texted me back and said, I caught up on the Survival Gear podcasts, and wow, man, God wrecked me in a couple of those and really spoke to me. That's what it's about. Same with our kids as we make disciples. They are to hear from God, not us, but they will watch and they will do and they will mimic. So, Dad, be careful. Know where you're going and communicate that in a way that is godly and is highlighting who you are following.
Yeah. Lawson, I want to tell you a brief story as we wrap up. But before I do, Dad, listen, we just finished a 7-part series called Survival Gear, which if you're just tuning in now, go back and listen to the first 6. It's about the essential ingredients of being a godly dad. We use a backpack metaphor, and it's like tools. It's like things you're throwing in your backpack. And we hope that this series has been a blessing to you. It sure has been a great refresher to me. And challenge me in a number of areas to make sure I've got these things thrown in my backpack and to have them in increasing measure and be using them more and more. But the story I wanted to tell you real quickly is, and this is bonus time. This is like bonus episode time. Mark up in Massachusetts. If you're listening, thank you for stopping me. I was, Lawson, at a wedding recently in Louisville, Kentucky, and family from lots of places came in for this wedding. In particular, a number of people from the Northeast, from like the Boston area and so forth. They all came in, big giant scat of folks from the Boston area. And I had met several of these folks before. It's kind of extended, in-law type family. So I don't know them super well. But my wife and my 2 boys and I were walking out of the wedding at 9:30 at night. And we're walking across this dark parking lot. And I hear somebody behind me go, hey, Kent. And I stop and I turn around. And he goes, you're the podcast guy, right?
No way.
Yeah. His name's Mark. He lives in Massachusetts. And I said, yeah. And I'll go, oh man, you and I met years ago. Like I remember when he was much younger and he came to Louisville for something other family related. So I've kind of known this guy 2 or 3 times before, but it's been like more than a decade, I think, since I saw him. He now has 3 kids. Now he's a dad. And he's listening to the Father on Purpose podcast. And he just said, hey, all I wanted to do was shake your hand and say, thanks for the podcast. I'm a recent listener and we really like it. Appreciate you. And he turned around and walked off like we talked for 3 minutes. Great dude. And I just wanted to remind the dad listening, do us a favor. Go tell somebody about this podcast. If at all this thing helps you, and you got a spare 10 grand laying around, send it our way. It helps fund the mission. But if you don't, go tell somebody about the podcast. Go just let them know that maybe this specific series on Survival Gear has been helpful, or this one episode. Share the podcast with somebody because if we could reach 5 guys or 50 or 5 million, I'll pick the 5 million. Let's go. And so, but we can't do that on our own. We need you to help us do that. So if you've found any value in the Father on Purpose podcast, like Mark from Massachusetts, go tell somebody about the podcast. We appreciate you. You guys are awesome. Have a great day. Oh, and next week we're going to have some great content. And over the next couple of months, we've got some folks lined up to interview.
Yeah,
so
exciting.
Stay tuned because we got some guests coming on you're going to love to hear from. Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember, you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org/podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call a person up and tell them to listen in. Number 2, subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.